my name's Scott Bedell. I'm here with the Mere Mortals Mountain Biking Podcast, and I've got a guest today that is an expert on nutrition topics. So Jeff, would you mind introducing yourself and saying a little bit about your experience with nutrition?
My name's Jeff Welch. I'm a coach with TNAC training, and my experience with nutrition, I guess, kind of dates back quite a while. I've been in the sport for upwards of 40 years. I've seen different trends of nutrition, what works, what doesn't work, and so I've kind of followed the different pathways, and nowadays being a coach myself, I'm really digging deep into what works for athletes and what doesn't.
So I think one of the first questions I'd like to start with, if it's okay, is why is nutrition important, especially for somebody who is getting into longer rides, racing, that sort of thing, and is used to just kind of eating a quick meal and then heading out?
Right. I guess it's just kind of a cliche comment, but you're fueling the car, you're fueling the beast. So we're burning calories while we're out there. We're burning what we call kilojoules, and we have to replenish those, especially if the ride gets longer. You have to be able to keep the fuel coming in, or just like driving down the highway on your car, you'll run out of gas. So that's the nuts and bolts of it is, hydration and fuel, and that's what keeps you going. Now, you can get into a lot more in the sense of what, where, how, and when, and I think we might cover that later.
Yeah. So one of the things that I started to notice when I started to ride a little bit longer racing is cramping, that sort of thing. So maybe can you start there with how we can avoid some of those side effects with better nutrition and hydration?
So the cramping gets a lot more in depth than just hydration. Cramping can also come from lifestyle, what you're eating on a daily basis versus what you're eating on the bike. So you have to look at those aspects of it, stretching, and how you're training, because you can cramp and be totally fit, but if you're not training those muscles to do what you're asking them to do in a race, you may cramp. But on the boxes you need to check off is making sure that you are properly hydrated with both water and electrolytes. That's probably your first rule of thumb. And when you're looking at that, you're probably, for just a real easy baseline, a bottle an hour is where you start.
Okay, that's excellent. That was one of the next questions I was going to ask you, is how do you calculate what to drink? Now, is that a bottle an hour starting right when you ride, or do you start beforehand for the electrolytes?
Well, you should be, if you're doing it right, you should be hydrated going in. Mm-hmm. And if you were, let's say we're prepping for a race, we would make sure that things are really on cue. If that race was on Saturday, you would want to start on Wednesday. Making sure you're taking in liquid and electrolytes. So you're when I'm trying to do that myself, I'll take a bottle and I'll drink a full bottle, then I'll turn around and put some type of electrolyte mix in it for my second bottle, and just flip-flop back and forth like that throughout my preparation. And those bottles would be your typical 21 ounce or 24 ounce water bottle. Okay.
And why do you need to add the electrolytes to the water rather than, through normal daily life, we're just drinking throughout the day?
Well, if you're prepping and you're consuming a fair amount of water, you can actually get to a point where you're washing electrolytes out. And that will, show its ugly face in the sense of diarrhea and GI distress, because you've kind of offset your electrolyte balance by just washing it all out. So if you can replenish some of that during the process, that's your goal.
Okay, and does that have something to do with sweating, releasing some of the chemicals?
And that would be kind of your next step, is when you're getting serious with it, and if you are finding some imbalances and some cramping or excessive sweating that just doesn't seem to be addressed with what you're doing, getting a sweat test is a great way to make sure you're getting in enough sodium. Because some people might only need, 250 milligrams an hour. Other people may need as much as 1,500 milligrams of sodium per hour. And that sweat test will give you that piece of data.
Okay, so to start, go into whether it's a race or a big ride, well hydrated, start with the bottle an hour. Maybe you can increase or decrease the milligrams based on how you feel. Is that a reasonable approach for
Yeah.
to start?
How you feel, making sure that you're not, if it's super hot, you might want to bump up those milligrams of sodium. If it's a cooler day, you need to remember to continue to intake that because you are still sweating even though it's cooler. You may not need as much sodium in that respect, but you are sweating, so you need to keep that bottle an hour theory still running strong.
Okay.
And one thing to keep in mind, the rate of sweat is not always indicative of how many milligrams of sodium you're sweating out. So you may be a heavy sweater, go and get a sweat test and find out that, oh, in fact, you're only, sweating 1,000 milligrams an hour, which is, not too excessive.
What about, I've heard that hydration has a big impact on your nervous system.
Yes, it affects everything. Let's say what I can tell you is that when you get dehydrated, your power drops about 30%. And, of course, if you're racing and you see a 30% drop in power, you're up the creek.
Yeah, so that makes sense. I had just heard that sort of as a comment in passing, and I've experienced that in my life, that if I'm super dehydrated, I just feel tired and I'm making bad decisions and that sort of thing. And I've seen that with some of the youth that we help out, right? If they show up with certain behaviors and you ask them, how much did you drink this week? And the answer is usually, oh, I don't know if I drank anything this morning.
Well, I would think a lack of focus would be, like you just said, is a big thing. If you talk about hydration and fueling within the race community, as a coach, that's probably the biggest thing that people don't address, when they come to me and we start laying out training plans and I start asking them questions, just like you said. So how much do you drink during a ride? Oh, I might drink, a bottle over 3 hours, and that's the wrong answer.
Yeah.
So, and that goes for the fueling too. It's just kind of, running on an empty tank doesn't work.
Yeah, and I know this wouldn't apply to adults, but for the middle schoolers that I help with, I just gave them a simple, like you say, from maybe Wednesday through to the weekend race, make sure you're getting about 8 ounces per every year of age. That was just sort of easy for them to do on a daily basis. And I think once they started trying to do that, they realized, wow, I'm not actually drinking that much during the day.
And that's the big misconception. People, sip on water and think, oh yeah, I'm properly hydrated. And then you start saying, no, you need to, drink a bottle an hour and see what happens.
Yeah.
And it definitely changes their perspective.
So as you mentioned, I would ask them to grab a bottle like we have here that's either a 21, 24, something like that, just to measure it out, right? And tell them to finish it and then sort of jot down how many of those they finish. And a lot of times they're only taking in about 20 ounces a day,
right?
Even though, like you said, it feels like a lot. So maybe talk me through, we've got some products here from a hydration standpoint, what you can put into the water bottle to add those electrolytes.
So pretty much every company under the sun right now has a electrolyte drink of some sort. I've got Scratch here in my hand. Scratch is probably one of the pioneers of getting people on a drink mix of some sort. Although there are some misconceptions that this is a fuel. This is not a fuel. This is a hydration drink. And I do remember, just off on a side note, when this was called Secret Drink Mix, and you reached out to Alan Lim for Secret Drink Mix, and then they went to Scratch, and it became kind of a household name. But one thing Scratch does with their hydration mix is they do put sugar in it. Some of the other brands you see, like Tailwinds and Carbo Rockets, if I remember correctly, do not have any sugar in it. And so this has 80 grams of calories. It has sodium, dextrose, citric acid, calcium citrate, and magnesium. And those are what you're when you hear someone talk about a electrolyte complex, that's what they're talking about, is those particular items. This particular drink mix has 400 milligrams of sodium. So if you were a heavy sweater and needed to get more than just what they consider one serving. You know, you might be dumping 3
Okay.
scoops in, and that's something that you really have to watch with every single product you're out there. See what a serving size for them is, and then make sure you're doing what you need versus what they're saying is just a serving.
Yeah, okay. So baseline yourself based on milligrams of sodium, essentially? Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah, and you know, like for myself personally, I would probably take 2 scoops of this. Although I don't sweat visibly a lot, I feel like I'm really good at around 800 milligrams when it's hot outside.
Okay.
So yeah, and then you know, other companies like Tailwinds, and like I say, they have half the calories, and they still put a little bit of sugar in there, a little less sodium per serving, and
What is the sodium comparison on a serving, just out of curiosity, for
So-
those 2 different ones?
for Scratch, you've got 400 milligrams. For Tailwinds, you have 320. But keep in mind the serving size. This is 22 grams for Scratch and 13 grams for Tailwinds.
Okay,
So,
yeah.
you know, there's a lot of little differences in just serving sizes that can affect what you need to take in and what they actually have in them.
Okay.
And that starts to become even more important and something you need to look at very closely when you buy fuels, because the serving sizes can be completely different and it might confuse you on how much you actually need or
Yeah.
which one's the best deal or something like that.
Okay. Yeah, and we'll get to the nutrition here in a little bit, but I have seen some people just kind of show up at a race and take the free little sample that's included, dump it in their bottle, and then not really have a good experience. And you know, it could be a variety of things. Maybe there's certain additives in there that upsets their stomach, but I always, based on the great advice you gave me earlier, look at that serving size and the sodium, so that I'm not accidentally getting twice as much or half as much,
Right.
that sort of thing. So I'm really glad you covered that. And then what about, you know, this is way more convenient than Gatorade, because you can just add a scoop to your water bottle and fill that water bottle up anywhere. But are there any other differences between something like this and Gatorade?
Gatorade, without having a bottle in front of me, I have always been told and kind of seen, especially with my life on the East Coast, as it's the evil. And a lot of folks I used to ride with in North Carolina, where the humidity was a lot higher, people are just sweating their brains out, and they drank Powerade and Gatorade, and they all cramped.
Yeah, okay.
And I convinced them to quit drinking Gatorade, and a lot of those folks' cramps went away. Partially, it's the sugar content.
Yeah.
And in sugar content in the wrong way can also lead to cramps, because your body is sending blood to your stomach to process that sugar, and then it neglects the extremities and you start to cramp.
Okay, yeah, makes sense.
So, yeah, I'm not a fan of Gatorade in any way, shape, or form. And one I neglected to mention, for very convenient, but it is a little different. Hammer Nutrition has an effervescent tab, kind of like Noon and some of those, that also have a very good electrolyte complex that you just drop in a bottle. It's easy to carry with you, especially if you're doing longer events that you may be stopping at aid stations. You can drop those in and get, you know, the correct amount of electrolytes that you need.
Yeah, very good. So just to sort of put everything together on hydration, so you need to come into your ride or your race well hydrated, and then, you know, you're supplementing the water with the powder, essentially, to counterbalance the high rate of speed that you're sweating out certain chemicals. Do I have that right? Okay.
Yeah.
And then what do you do if you do show up to a race and you weren't great with the hydration or something like that? Are there any tips you can do, not to completely replace good habits, but to mitigate
right.
life happening?
I mean, if you got there and realized, okay, wow, I haven't done anything, I feel kind of parched. I mean, first things first, before the race, consuming just a bottle of hydration.
Okay.
And that would help. And then if you don't even have that luxury and you have to just get going, just start your feeding regimen of liquids very quickly. You know, there's nothing wrong with drinking and eating within the first 15 minutes of a race. And again, depending on what that race Duration that'll play a big part on if that's going to come back and haunt you or not, or
Yeah.
if you can kind of gut through it.
Okay.
So I won't say there's really any, barring an IV, I don't think there's any real like, I'm up the creek type of save, but you can kind of mitigate some of those issues by starting your process early.
Okay, good. I wasn't given such bad advice because when kids would show up at 8 a.m., or I guess at 7 a.m. for their 8 a.m. race, and I'd ask them if they drank anything yet, and they'd say no. And I'd say, well, the first thing you need to do before worrying about even getting your race plate on is sit down and have a bottle of water.
Yep.
Okay, so that covers the basics of hydration. You've alluded to the nutrition side of things. So can you talk about that? Similarly, starting back, before the race or even, earlier in the day before a training ride, that sort of thing, and how important that is.
Mm-hmm. So nutrition, to kind of start it at square one, you have glycogen in your system. Your muscles have glycogen stored in them. They have about an hours to an hour and a half lifespan, depending on the intensity of what you're doing. So the nutrition that you're bringing in on the bike is to supplement that. You're not going to replace it. You can't replace it, but you can offset the negative effects. Now, as we said with hydration, if you're getting ready, preparing for a race or something, you want to start probably the Wednesday prior in typically what we call carbo loading. You've probably heard that thrown around for a zillion years. That term has been around forever. Sometimes it's popular, sometimes it's not. It's popular again. But carbo loading starting kind of on a Wednesday, making sure that those glycogen stores are topped off.
Okay.
Then when you get to race day, kind of same thing, you want to top off the top off. So you've done your breakfast, and what you want to have is a fairly potent fuel that you drink for probably till the starting maybe an hour and a half prior to the event, and you've finished that about 15 minutes or so prior to the event. And that's something with a very high caloric value that is going to kind of top off all those stores. Another good reason for that, if it's a high intensity event like a regular Olympic cross country, hour and a half in duration, you may not have an opportunity to drink or eat on the bike for the first half an hour because of the intensity of the race. So you want to make sure that you're properly prepared going into it. Then at a point, you'll start your fueling process. Again, that can start in the first 15 minutes, 20 minutes, half an hour, depending, again, if it's a 1 hour event or a 6 hour event.
Okay.
And so those are kind of the starting points. You want a carbo load coming into it, top everything off. Some people will even do a gel within 5 minutes of that start and then go out and do your race.
Okay. So what about, let's assume there's like an 8 a.m. race and you don't want to get up super early. What do you recommend? Skipping breakfast and going straight to like the gels, or do you try to get that whole foods down first?
It kind of depends on what you're used to, because you don't want to suddenly race day just flip the script.
Okay.
You want to try to, you can, I guess what I see a lot of times is athletes train, and spend 6 months training, and then flip the script the morning of, and they've completely sabotaged themselves going into the event. So you kind of, first off, want to do what works for you. Some people can eat a lot. I've even experienced as of late waking up 3 hours prior to the event, eating, and then going back to bed, just so you got that fuel, and then went back to bed for a couple hours. This is usually when the race starts at 7 a.m. or something like that. Then just topping everything off, if you totally skipped it and did that bottle in advance, if you'd done your work those days prior, you're probably all right, as long as you start fueling early. But again, you want to kind of get into a pattern or a rhythm and do that every time.
Okay.
And I guess I ought to mention one other thing. It will differ a little bit in males and females. It's like a male athlete can come off of a fast a lot better than a female athlete can. So a male athlete might skip breakfast, do a bottle of high carbohydrate drink, and be fine. A female athlete, the way they will burn carbohydrates and then go into a fat burning process, needs some kind of substance prior to that event. So there is different fueling strategies for each for males and females.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that advice you've given me in the past works very well for me, to have something starting, let's say, about an hour before. So some of the products that I've used are sort of splitting the nutrition and hydration, right? So maybe I put something in my water bottle for hydration, and then I have like gels or blocks or something like that. And then other times you can combine together. Can you talk through a little bit of the options there and pros and cons of each?
Sure. So in fuels, again, like hydration, every company under the sun has something. They go at it in different ways. Some companies look at, like you were just mentioning, as a fuel only, which means when I say a fuel, I'm talking something that has as much as 300 calories and say 75 to 80 grams of carbohydrates. And that's kind of a key point you need to look at, because when we're looking at fueling strategy, we're not looking as much at calories as we are at grams of carbohydrates. Okay. So depending on your body type, what your gut will absorb and things like that, you want to probably do anywhere from 60 to, you hear talk of the tour riders doing 120 grams of carbohydrates per hour, which, I can't wrap my head around, but they say that that's what they're taking in. So like I say, some companies are pure fuel. Other companies, like CarboRocket, for instance, add some branched chain amino acids as well as an electrolyte complex in it. So that is really and truly an all-in-one. Other companies, you might have to supplement each one of those separately. So I think Tailwind, they have a little bit of sodium in there, so they are also looking at somewhat of being that all-in-one. But there are other companies, I think it's Precision Hydration and some of the others out there that are just strictly, they want your hydration and your fueling to be different animals.
Okay, I was going to ask about that, because I actually sort of fell into the CarboRocket combo package because I had Invisalign and I couldn't eat the blocks or anything like that. But what is the downside of having them combined? I mean, I rather enjoy it.
I don't think there is, other than if probably you're on an extreme of one point or another, where you don't, either you don't need that much sodium or you need more sodium. I think Never Second even makes a liquid sodium additive that you can add to their regular fuel to bump up those sodium numbers. So, a few things to keep in mind with fueling. It's very, very personal preference. I get people that come into the shop all the time and they want to know what's the silver bullet? Or, I guess that's the best way to put it. And
I was asking that one time.
And it's hard to pinpoint it because there's a lot of factors. You have to train your gut, because there's not many people who can just go into this and go, oh yeah, I'm going to absorb 90 grams carbohydrates right off the bat without some kind of GI distress. So we have to look at that. You have to see which brand uses the right kind of ingredients that play nice with your body. And you've got to look at, what your event is, how the duration, the intensity, different things like that, because it all plays into the big picture. In the sense of fueling, I know there's a big popularity with the blocks from Scratch or Cliff or whatever.
They look so cool just lined up on your top.
And that's about where it ends.
Yeah, that's what I have.
Really cool.
I don't know why anybody wants to chew something when they can just drink it.
Right. And, it maybe gives them something to do. But if you kind of think of a fueling strategy, you almost have to open that package, dump the entire package down your throat to just begin to get what one bottle of a proper fuel does. So they're not always the best things, but you also have to look at palate fatigue. So if you're drinking something and you just need that change of pace, that might be what does it, Eating one of those every once in a while, as long as you are doing some other fueling, might be fine,
Yeah, makes sense.
Stopping at a feed station and eating a pickle. Not for cramping issues, but just to cleanse your palate and kind of change the game for a little while. Because you definitely, with these high carbohydrate drinks, there's a lot of sugar in there, and it starts to get icky at a point.
Yeah, you gave me some really good advice a couple years ago when I started getting into all this about training your gut, because I have a lot of food allergies, and then I also have an autoimmune disorder with my throat, and certain chemicals really starts to flare it up. And so it's taken me a while to figure out what I need. And I only mention that to say that if all of my issues can figure out a path, then I think most will be easier. But I will say that if you just, again, show up at that race, drop the hydration in your bottle, take the free gels, it may be great, or it may really upset your stomach. And so I always tell the people that I coach, try it several weeks before it's worth, the $3 to buy the sample size, or the single serving, I should say. And speaking of that, I really like personally the Hammer system, just because once I did find the one that my body prefers, I then buy it in bulk with the large bottle, pour it into a flask, add a tiny bit of water to make it easier to come out of that flask, and it works really well for me. I also love the Carbo Rocket, where if I need the electrolytes, like you say, it's just all coming at once. In addition to training your gut, one of the things I find difficult for newer riders, and certainly myself, is how to consume it, right? So I saw this complicated system at my first race where this guy had multiple gel packets taped on his top tube, and they're like pre-ripped, so where they're ready to come out. And then one of them was leaking and leaked all over his bike. And then I've seen people lick the blocks and put them on the top tube. To me, that's very complicated. What do you recommend to people? Obviously, the water bottle is pretty easy, but what's your thoughts on all this?
So it kind of depends on the event. So in my gravel racing, let's say, which is usually a 4 to, say, 6 hour event, I will use water bottles and a hydration pack. Generally, on the gravel side of things, that hydration pack will have my electrolytes, the bottles will have the fuel. Because it's easy on a gravel bike to consume those, to grab those bottles and fuel, and then you're just using the pack for the hydration purposes. Sometimes we'll utilize a feed station, and I'll have another dose of the fuel in a baggie, open the bottle, pour that in, fill it with water, and be on my way.
Okay.
Everything's kind of, in the speed type thing. Now, as of recent, I did the Breck Epic in Colorado. Not able to get to bottles as quickly on a mountain bike, plus my mountain bike only takes one bottle, which a lot of them do. So I had to flip that and run fuel in the hydration pack, or in the pack on my back, my small Camelback or something like that, and use the water bottle as my hydration. Now, in that particular event, each stage was about 4.5 hours long, so we were using drop bags, and were given, so I would get a fresh pack at about 3 hours in, or about 2.5 hours in. So I kept, my goal in each event was to consume all that liquid prior to getting the fresh pack. I would have a pack with a bottle stuck in it, switch those super fast, and be on my way. So it kind of depends on the event, on how you go about getting it. I would suggest, if the mountain bike race is over a couple hours, that you go to a pack and your fuel is in your pack, because then you can continue to sip on that nonstop, and you're constantly getting that fuel, versus maybe being able to reach down, grab that bottle once every 10 minutes and hopefully get a good swig and throw it back on your bike real quick.
Yeah, that's excellent. Just a couple tips I've picked up. When I'm running a pack, I find myself constantly dropping the tube, And so I saw somebody with one of those, like when you have an office badge and it's on a retractable leash. And so I just got one of those off of Amazon, wrapped the leash around the tube. And then when I'm done with the tube, I just drop it and it goes right down to
Nice.
where it needs to go. That was the best $2 I've ever spent on biking.
Bet.
And then the second thing is definitely I use a pack for longer stuff, but especially with younger or really new riders, I warn them against a pack can suddenly just be empty versus a bottle has that visual indicator. And so
Right.
even when I run something like even the whiskey 25, which you're not going to die out there if you run out of water, but I always just have an extra water bottle just in case, or rely on a feed station, something like that. In addition to storing the unused items, one thing that just is a pet peeve of mine is seeing all the discarded gel packets and stuff on the trail. So please, people, it's super easy to put that gel packet right back where you got it. Leave no trace helps event organizers have a much easier time getting next year's permit.
And there's one other thing along those lines. A lot of the companies are now creating mix your own gels, flow formulas, and blanks. It's called Blanks Nutrition out of Flagstaff. And Flow, they provide a flask and you scoop in with this very interesting little scoop how many grams of carbohydrates you want, mix it with warm water, and it's a gel flask, a collapsible gel flask in your pocket, so you're not discarding gel packets all along. Blanks goes one step further, and you can customize that gel, again, for how much sodium, how much carbohydrates you want in that gel flask. And those are what I utilize so that I'm not just tearing open a packet every single time, especially for something like Breck Epic, which is 6 days. I'd probably would have consumed 30 gel packs. And by using this mix your own process, you've eliminated that use. And you're right, I think after BWR in Scottsdale, I was pretty pissed off on how many gel packs I saw on the trail. I mean, I could have started my own gel company with how many unopened gel packs were on the trail.
Yeah.
It was disgusting. I make a note of, if I open it, I will empty it and it goes in my pocket. Another side benefit of that is I can go back and see what I took in to make sure that I'm on track of what I needed.
Yeah, that's a great point. And you can tell me if I'm supposed to be doing this, but with the hammer gels, if I have some left in the flask, I put it in the fridge and I can use it on another ride a couple days later versus, if you've opened a gel and ate half of it or it didn't come out right or whatever, it's just the single packets, I'm just not the biggest fan of them. They're a lot to manage. You talked about how to store the nutrition, that sort of thing, but I've found that there's kind of a rhythm you have to get into to ride your bike fast on a tight course with people passing you, that sort of thing, and then take down even some water or whatever. So, or certainly gels. So, I mean, I kind of look for, flatter, easier spots. But what tips do you have for folks, especially when racing, on when to get that in your system and how?
So the best thing that I ever did around year 2000 was I had a coach at that point who said, we have to train how to eat on the bike. And so not only were we training on how to do it, but how your body would act if your heart rate was at 185, and because back then we weren't doing as much of the drinking, it was more gels and bars. So imagine consuming a bar and chewing on that when your heart rate's at 180, 185, or slamming down a gel. So you have to train for it, just like every single aspect of, like when you're training your body to race it a certain way, you have to train yourself how to eat and drink a certain way at that. So finding a kind of flowy technical section of single track, Brownlow there's a lot of it, and just have it, practice reaching back and grabbing something. You don't have to actually eat a gel at that point, but it might be helpful. But practicing that, going through the movements on how to take that out of your pocket, put it in your mouth, continue racing, breathing through your nose temporarily, and then a lot of gels, sometimes you need a big swig of water afterwards. I found myself actually getting in a tight spot and just having to put the bottle in my mouth and ride for a minute or two with a bottle hanging out of my mouth or a gel hanging out of my mouth. You know, it may be a step-by-step process where you tear the gel, keep it in your mouth, and then eat the gel, and then keep it in your mouth, and then put it in your pocket before you keep on, you know, while you're going. So it's all training.
I had that little hammer flask kind of sitting in my mouth, and it was tipped up, and then I realized it was leaking down the outside of my lip. One thing that I've found is helpful, and again, just as a newbie, I kind of, when I'm pre-riding a race course, mark the good points to consume. And it's not only easier to do, but it gives me some motivation, right? It's almost like when you're on a road trip and you're looking forward to that stop at the restaurant. And so I can power up that, you know, hard climb or whatever, where I don't want to give anybody any advantage to come around me. And then look forward to being able to consume that. So this is excellent as far as before and during a race. One of the things that's really helped me, especially, you know, as we get older, is recovery. Hydration and nutrition. So can you talk about that a little bit? And it's certainly not limited, at least again in my experience, to racing, but just any ride. The more I recover, the better I'm going to feel for the next ride.
So first and foremost, in the world of recovery, the best free recovery you have accessible to you is sleep, bar none. You can trump everything else with proper sleep habits. So I'll start with that. Then when you come off your exercise, no matter what it is, you kind of have a window for replenishing glycogen. That window is about an hour long. And again, I'm speaking for the male side of things. So I'll first start with that. And you have this open window of about an hour that, if you can imagine, is then starting to close. And so you come off the bike and basically your body is saying, feed me with any type of sugar. And, you know, I'm not a fan of Cokes and things like that, but some people find a Coke or something is great. A lot of companies, again, make recovery fuels. My thing is, you know, I'm looking for something with glutamine in it to replenish, you know, your muscles. Any type of fairly simple sugar that you can down. You know, you don't have to go overboard, but just to get something in. The first 15 minutes is great, and in the window, like I say, the window's closing for that next hour. Then a couple hours down, you want a real meal. And so those are your two main things. If it was a very hot event, again, start your rehydration process. You know, you're looking, if you burn 3,000 calories, you're looking to put back at least 2,000. You know, that's kind of what you're aiming for. Again, with females and female athletes, you have to, because of the burning process is a little different, they need to have a protein within that first hour of some sort. So, you know, like as a male, you might wait and have your protein with that meal 2 hours. With a female, you'll want, whether it's a recovery shake with protein in it, but you want to start getting protein back in the system a lot faster.
Okay. So tell me, if I'm doing halfway decent here, if I'm going out, I calculate the number of gel servings I need, put it in my flask. I just add one more, so that if I get out on the bike a little bit longer, it's there for me. But then usually I'm just doing that as my quick recovery. Is that okay? Because I know there's specialty products, but that's been working pretty good for me.
Well, one thing I tell people is if you calculated out all your fueling correctly and you get done and there's some left, consume what's left in your bottles. Finish off your bottles, whether it's just hydration or fuel as well. A lot of times, if I don't have a recovery drink handy, I'll do what you just said, and I'll take what's left of the gel flask and finish that off as well. So you're starting that process right then. And, you know, if you have to go to the store and grab something real quick, you know, but again, that first 15 minutes, getting stuff in, and you can definitely use stuff you had on the ride that you didn't use as a supplement.
Because I don't want anybody to think this is exclusive to competitive riding. I mean, for me, I'm squeezing in a bike ride and a break at work, and I want to have as much fun out on that ride as possible. So if I'm going for a couple hours, yeah, I'll take some gels so that I don't get hungry and sort of drain the tank too much there. But then I find that it's really way easier for me to bounce right back to work by having that last gel just as I'm putting my bike away and that sort of thing. So that's made a huge impact on my just sort of enjoyment of the rest of the day after a hard ride.
Well, that's kind of the impetus, if you can think of it on a macro scale, for the Tour de France riders. That's why they're taking in 120 grams of carbohydrates, and you'll watch them in a race and they're down to 10K to go, which for them is, 15 minutes max, and they're still eating and drinking. Well, what they're doing is they're fueling themselves for the next day. And in our lives, it's fueling us to finish our day at work or get in the next ride tomorrow, even though it may not be a race. But you're right, it just helps. Our bodies live off sugar to a point, and our brain feeds off that, and if you can keep everything in balance, that'll keep you rolling for the later in the day. One thing I do want to say about the new fueling strategies of bringing in that many carbohydrates per hour is that isn't really something people should live by off the bike. You don't want to just keep those carbs coming in, or there'll be some bad complications down the road. So your body processes this stuff when you're exercising, but once you quit exercising, that processes change, and they're not positive. So you want to, if you're into a sugar-free diet, keep with that sugar-free diet, except for on the bike.
This is excellent. So as Jeff knows, we're here at Bikesmith Cyclery, by the way, in Prescott, Arizona. So if you ever either live here or coming through, they obviously have a great selection of different products, and Jeff knows, obviously, as you're hearing now, all about when you should choose each one. But I'm not the biggest gearhead. I razz a lot of my friends. They have to have the newest cassette or the newest suspension. Honestly, the biggest enjoyment I've had to my bike in the last several years is bike fit, which we have another episode with Jesse on that, but Jeff knows a ton about that, so that I'm comfortable riding, and then nutrition, so that I'm having a really good time with my body. And I just feel like my body is definitely the weaker link. My body needs all the help it can get on the muscles and hydration, that sort of thing. But that said, I do have several friends who, go pretty far with DIY stuff. So do you have any recommendations there of, just the old, like, putting salt in the water and that sort of thing?
Well, I've got several friends, and I've just never had the time to do it, who make their own drink mixes. And if it's working for you, I'd say go for it. Now, in the sense of hydration, you talk about people who will eat salt tablet or not, to get that sodium, they're looking at salt tablets and things like that. I've never tried that. I've always kind of used a drink mix my entire life. But I'm going through from the 80s on in a competitive way. I've seen everything, being used, where salt tablets, and then Hammer came out with electrolyte capsules, and a lot of people use those. They just have a little, actually they use, remember the old coin purses? Yeah. And you pop that open and just down a bunch of electrolyte capsules. And then I had friends start to experiment with creating their own fuels, over a decade ago. Fueling strategies were way different back then, but if you've got a formula that works for you, I'd say stay on it.
Yeah, I was pretty impressed. Well, what did I miss from your perspective?
Nothing really. I mean, the only thing, I guess to kind of recap, in the fueling side of things, you'll get people who just instantly grab a product, go home, do 90 grams of carbohydrates on their first try at it, and like, this product's no good. Yeah. Because they didn't train their gut. And maybe 90 is too much for them. So when you get into the nutrition aspect of things, it's very, very, very personalized. I mean, and like you had mentioned earlier, buying the sample packs, the one serving packs of things is definitely the way to go, because then you're able to see what products work best, see what level of carbohydrates work best for you. I've played with as many as 100 grams, and I can do it, but it's not great. I find 75 to 90 is probably my sweet spot, and that'll vary per person, and it varies per event. But you got to play with those aspects, and a lot of people just want to be able to just try it and say, oh, this is the best thing ever, and that's not really the way it always goes. So practice weeks in advance, like you were mentioning. You don't want to wait till race day to try stuff. I mean, that's usually a big recipe for disaster.
Yeah. And then, I mean, it's awesome that almost every bike shop has some sort of nutrition and hydration supplement, but I do tend to favor shops like here where there's lots of options with different advice on what option may be best for you, so that you can hone that in. Because I've definitely seen people just grab the free giveaway and have a worse experience than had they not taken anything at all. Well, excellent. I really appreciate it. I've just got a couple lightning round questions here. Some of them are just funny. So spandex versus baggy fit, which do you prefer?
Spandex.
I knew that one. How about electronic versus cable shifting?
Oh boy, that's a toughie, because I have each.
Okay, because I'm a holdout. I refuse to go the electronic.
I honestly, if it comes down to it, I've almost got to say electronic, because you just don't realize how many mistakes you make with your digits, and the electronic doesn't do that.
Yeah, that's what everybody's telling me. What is your favorite product? I think you mentioned you prefer to do combo of fuel and hydration. Is that right? Typically.
And my favorite, gosh, that's a hard call, because I'm always trying to kind of vet new stuff for the shop or for athletes, and I don't know that I have an all-time favorite.
Different products for different needs.
Yep.
Excellent. And then what about from a nutrition standpoint? What was your most challenging ride ever, and what did you learn from that?
Ooh. In modern times or older times?
It doesn't matter.
Probably older times. I mean, again, you might have a couple bars and a couple gels, and there was this 1 Century ride in Western North Carolina, and the big go-to goal was like 5 hours for 103 miles with 10,000 feet of climbing. And I finished it in 5 hours and 59 seconds, and I could probably go back to where I call it the dark spot, where you might not have had enough fuel, that if I had fueled like I do nowadays, it would have been, I would have made that 5 hours.
Yeah.
And I've had that happen actually on a couple events, off-road assault in Mount Mitchell, again in North Carolina. Had a dark moment on the Blue Ridge Parkway, and again, if I'd used modern day fueling strategies, probably wouldn't have had that.
Yeah.
So.
No, that's a great point. I had a couple friends at this year's 24 Hours in the Old Pueblo just comment on how much I was constantly eating, right? And I'm like, well, I did 8 laps, and I don't know, let's just say 1,000 to 2,000 calories per lap. So that adds up a lot. And that's something that I didn't realize until a couple of years ago, until I got in those situations, just like you're mentioning, where I saw the obvious difference between not having that last gel or whatever it may be, and you just your performance goes way down. What about modern times, as far as, have you had like any stories like mine where you accidentally did double or mixed wrong, or?
Off the top of my head, I can't remember. I have forgotten fuels before, and then basically spent the time going, hey, do you have an extra gel, while racing along.
I've seen that on course.
That's probably the worst that I can think of. I'll probably remember it tonight when I go to bed. But
no, that's good.
Yeah.
And so speaking of the investment for this, because like I said, I'm not the biggest gear guy, but the Carbo Rocket stuff that I prefer, let's see, it's about $37, gets you 10 servings. So for a few dollars every ride, it really makes, in my experience at least, a big difference, even just on a recreational ride where you're just wanting to go out for, more than an hour, where you kind of do need to help your body along and have a lot more fun at it, because I've certainly done it without it. But I look at anything from maybe some photos I've taken to post to Strava to my performance, and the fun factor and the power and everything is just going down if I'm not helping my body out. So,
and keep in mind, at that price, you don't have to mix that at full strength for that hour-long ride. In fact, for an hour-long ride, you'd probably use a third or less of that. 2 hours, you might use a third of that. And again, if we're doing our afternoon ride where we're not, doing any intervals or something, 100 calories, which would be like 25 grams of carbohydrates, might be all you need. But it will, like you were talking about, get you ready for the next time. You might be a little more clear-headed afterwards. I find anything over an hour and a half, that's where people start to make that critical mistake of not bringing anything in, and then at an hour and a half, the lights go out. Because that's when those glycogen stores have basically exhausted themselves.
That's when you start to see people pulled over on the whiskey and that sort of thing, and just reconsidering their decision. So again, I'll give a plug for Bikesmith. They have a wonderful selection of nutrition and hydration products. If you're in Prescott for a race like the whiskey, or you live here, swing by. Otherwise, try to find a shop with something similar in your area. And then Jeff has a fantastic wealth of knowledge about these products, but can you give a bit of information about your coaching and the website people can go to there?
Sure. I've been coaching now for 4 or 5 years with Tanak Coaching, and our website is gotanak.com, and the owner of the company is Jason Tullis, who's an Arizona native. He's currently living in Colorado, but he's a world champion mountain biker, and we've got a whole plethora of about 5 coaches, all of which have either been world tour riders, national champions, world champions. So it's kind of a whole plethora of folks out there, and we provide a great service, and something to look into.
Awesome. So thanks again, Jeff. I really appreciate the time.
All right. Thank you for having me.